The sound hit me first. A soft, breathy moan that wasn't mine. Not hers, either. Not the way she sounded with me. It floated through the half-cracked bedroom door like a ghost dragging cold fingers across my spine. For a split second I thought the TV was on. Or maybe she was on another late-night video call with one of her friends. But then I heard a low grunt. Masculine, intimate. The kind a man makes only when someone's hands are on him. My lungs forgot how to work. The grocery bag slipped from my fingers and apples rolled across the hallway floor, thudding against the baseboard like small, accusing hearts. And there it was again. Her voice, a whisper this time, breathless and pleading. Don't stop, please. It wasn't the words that gutted me. It was the tone. Soft. Hungry. Alive in a way she hadn't sounded for me in months. Everything I thought I knew about the last 8 years of my life splintered in an instant. My hand brushed the doorknob, and for a moment I imagined ripping the door open, confronting the truth head-on. But something primal in me, fear, maybe, rooted my feet to the hardwood. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. Only feel. And what I felt was every stage of heartbreak crashing into me at once. 6 months earlier. If you had asked me then whether Emily could ever cheat, I would have laughed. She was loyal to a fault. The kind of woman who texted me if she'd be 10 minutes late. She had this earnestness, this sincerity that made dishonesty seem beneath her. Besides, we'd been through hell together. Lost a pregnancy, rebuilt our finances from scratch after my business folded, moved to a quieter neighborhood to reconnect with each other. We were supposed to be stronger because of it. But looking back, the signs were there. Tiny cracks in the veneer I was too naive, or too in love, to see. It began with her new job. A promotion at the firm. Senior project lead. More responsibility, more late nights, more stress. I believed her. Hell, I was proud of her. She finally had the recognition she'd fought for. The change meant more hours away from home, but I told myself it was temporary. A phase. We're building something long-term, she would say, kissing my cheek before slipping out the door with her laptop bag. But the cracks widened. The new perfume she swore she bought because it was on sale. The extra hour she spent getting ready because clients pay attention to details. The inside jokes with people I'd never met. The phone always face down. Then the change in her body language, subtle, but sharp like a splinter under the skin. Flinching when I touched her waist. Turning away when I kissed her neck. Sighing, almost guilty, after our intimacy, if you could even call it that anymore. She would lie still, her eyes open but somewhere else entirely, her breath uneven and distant like she was mourning something I could not see. Every time I tried to talk to her, she would blame work. Stress? Alex. It's just stress. I'm exhausted. You're reading too much into things. And the worst. Can you please stop acting like I'm the enemy? I wasn't acting. But she was. I should have pushed harder, asked deeper questions, insisted on honesty. But I didn't want to be the paranoid husband, the controlling husband, the insecure husband. So instead, I swallowed my unease and tried harder. I cooked dinner, cleaned the house, picked her up from work occasionally just to surprise her. I told myself love meant patience. It meant trust. It meant believing in the partner you vowed your life to. Looking back now, I see it clearly. I wasn't trying to save our marriage. I was begging for scraps of affection from someone already gone. 3 months before. The night everything truly began to unravel, long before I heard those voices behind the bedroom door, was the night she came home with a bruise blooming along her collarbone. A round, shadowy mark. Too high for an accidental bump. Too intimate to be ignored. What happened? I asked, reaching out before she jerked away like my touch burned her. Nothing. I hit the cabinet at work. Her voice trembled. She didn't meet my eyes. Her hand kept brushing the bruise like she was trying to wipe it off her skin. You hit a cabinet, I repeated slowly, my jaw tightening. Yes, Alex. A cabinet. Can we drop it? We didn't drop it. Not in my mind. That night I watched her sleep, or pretend to sleep, her back curled away from me, her breaths uneven. She clutched her phone like a lifeline, and every time it buzzed, she tensed. I stared at the ceiling for hours, waiting for the courage to ask the question that lodged in my throat like shrapnel. Are you seeing someone else? But I couldn't say it. If I said it, the possibility became real. So I lay in the dark with the weight of unspoken truths pressing on my chest. 1 month before, things got worse. I caught her smiling at her phone, one of those small, secret smiles people don't even realize they're making. The kind that comes from an inside joke or a warm memory or a message from someone who makes you feel seen. Someone who isn't your spouse. Who's that? I asked casually. A coworker. What coworker? Just someone I collaborate with. What's their name? Her pause was too long. Does it matter? She said finally, avoiding my eyes, grabbing her coat. I need to head out. There's a meeting. On a Sunday afternoon. That was the moment my stomach dropped. My marriage, my life, was becoming a stranger's story, one I was watching from the outside without permission to intervene. The present. But none of that prepared me for the sound behind the bedroom door. I stood frozen in the hallway, blood roaring in my ears. Something inside me begged to stop listening, to turn around, to walk out and preserve the illusion a little longer. But I couldn't. I pressed my palm to the door, the wood warm beneath my fingertips. Her voice rose again, breathless, pleading, raw. It felt like someone reached inside my chest and twisted. Then came the sentence that cleaved my world into a before and an after. God, Mark. I needed this. I miss you. Mark. A name. Not baby. Not love. Not oh, God. A name. Concrete. Specific. Intimate. My knees nearly gave out. Mark. The same Mark she'd mentioned in passing months ago. The same coworker she said was just part of the project. The same man she swore I didn't need to worry about. That was what shattered me. Not just the act, but the ease of the lie. The casual way she had woven him into her life while pushing me out of mine. I felt something shift inside me then. Not rage, not sorrow. Clarity. A sharp, cold stillness flooded through me. The kind people describe when they talk about surviving trauma. The body shutting off emotion to preserve whatever is left unbroken. I stepped back silently, the floor creaking beneath me like a warning. The moan stopped abruptly. I heard hurried rustling, whispers, feet hitting the carpet. Did you hear that? Emily asked, panic threading her voice. Relax, a man whispered back. My heart hammered, but my mind remained eerily calm. Measured. Intentional. I walked out of the hallway, down the stairs, and into the kitchen. My hands moved on their own, placing the spilled groceries back into the bag, wiping my palms on my jeans, reaching for something on the counter. My phone. My vision tunneled, but not from tears. From purpose. This was not the moment to burst in or scream or demand answers. No. This was the moment to watch. To remember every detail. To decide what came next. Revenge wasn't born out of anger. It was born out of humiliation. And I had been humiliated for months without realizing it. Not anymore. 6 hours earlier. That morning had been painfully normal. Emily left before sunrise, kissing my cheek with lips colder than frost. She said she had an early conference call. She looked tired, guilty, even, but I pushed the thought away. I'd been doing that for weeks. Do you want me to pick you up later? I'd asked. No, I'll probably be home late. Late. Again. I offered to bring dinner to her office. She refused. I told her I missed her. She smiled without meaning it. I watched her drive away with a heaviness in my chest I couldn't name. Some part of me sensed the truth was closing in on us, inevitable as a storm. But I didn't know how violently it would break. Back to the present. Upstairs, I heard them moving. The shuffle of feet. The quick, guilty whispering. The sound of my dresser drawer sliding open and slamming shut. Then the bathroom door clicked. They were hiding. Regrouping. Planning whatever excuse she would feed me. And maybe, if I had been a different man, I would have confronted them right then. Kicked the door open. Ended it with shock and carnage. But the humiliation had cured me of impulsive anger. It had given me something better. A plan. I set my phone on the table and pressed record. My breathing shook only once. After that, it was steady, controlled. I walked to the bottom of the stairs and called up, forcing my voice into something soft. Something unsuspecting. Emily? I'm home early. Silence. A long, trembling silence. Then her voice, too bright, too fake. Hey. I'm in the shower. I'll be down soon. My chest tightened. A shower. Washing him off her. I swallowed a bitter laugh. Okay, I said quietly. Take your time. And then I waited. Calm. Still. Unrecognizably cold. Because sometimes the worst betrayals don't break you. Sometimes they turn you into something sharper. Something patient. Something willing to burn everything down if that's what justice required. And Emily had no idea what she had just awakened. When the front door clicked shut behind me and the house settled into a brittle quiet, I walked straight to the little shelf by the stairs where I kept odds and ends. Spare keys, a flashlight, the box of old SD cards I'd never thrown away. The recorder app on my phone blinked red, the file already humming with the proof of their betrayal. I listened to it once, twice. The first time I only catalogued facts, names, sounds, rhythms of speech. The second time I tried to locate the place inside me that still loved her, to see whether it was salvageable. It was not. It felt like a fossil. There were fragments, memories, a laugh, the smell of lemon soap, but they were brittle and distant. The plan hatched in cold, surgical stages. Not out of cruelty. Out of a calculation so precise it almost felt merciful. Step 1. Collect everything. Step 2. Control the narrative. Step 3. Ensure nobody could look at Emily the same way again. It was all vocabulary for humiliation, yes, but I wanted something else under the fury. Not merely punishment, but accountability. She had been erasing me for months, editing me out of our shared life with the delicacy of a surgeon. I wanted her to see what that did to another person. I told myself this while I drove across town to the firm where she worked. The building was glass and concrete, a marble lobby with a receptionist who knew all the permutations of corporate small talk. The elevator smelled faintly of lemon polish. I pressed the button for the 10th floor like I'd been going there all my life. Emily was not at her desk. Of course she wasn't. I checked the project board, scanned the names of colleagues, and found Mark's extension. The number was printed cleanly on a laminated team contact sheet like it belonged there. Another neat lie. I called him. His voicemail was clipped and professional. I left a message in a voice I practiced in the car. Warm, apologetic, deliberately neutral. Hi Mark. This is Alex from the Smith account. I wanted to touch base about next week's logistics. If you can give me a call back, that'd be great. It felt strange to be polite. I felt like a spy in my own life. The return call came late that afternoon. He said his voice sounded gravelly in the phone, like someone who smoked, though I'd only ever imagined him as the kind of man who ate salads at his desk. Alex? Yeah. I thought you might call. Coffee tomorrow? We can go over the deck. I didn't say that I already knew his voice in ways I never wanted to know it. I agreed. We met in a cafe close to his office, a low-lit place that favored artisanal muffins and men in fitted blazers. Mark arrived with 2 coffees and a wary smile. Up close, he looked younger than I'd imagined. Clean jawline, restless eyes, a nervous energy he tried to hide in jokes. He extended his hand. Alex, he said. Thanks for meeting. Emily's mentioned you. She did. I kept my face casual, the way you keep your expression when a bone is sticking out of a dog's leg. Calm, even as panic simmers behind your eyes. Yeah, he said, stirring his coffee. She said you were good with the new CRM system. Big help. The conversation flowed the way confrontations do when they are avoided, around the edges. I asked about work. He asked about my business. We danced a polite 2-step while the real choreograph, the one where I tripped him into revealing why he'd been with my wife, remained offbeat. When I finally brought Emily up, it was like opening a vein. She's brilliant, Mark said, almost too easily. Smart. She gets people to talk. She's funny, in that dry way. She keeps the team anchored. Does she talk about me? The words came out narrower than I intended. Mark's face shifted. Something like confusion, then discomfort. Sometimes. She talks about how tired she is, how much she cares about the work. She mentioned that you were going through a rough patch when the store collapsed. She said you were steady with her. I didn't. You didn't what? I asked. He swallowed. I didn't want to be the kind of guy who stepped into anything messy. His denial had the ring of truth. He wasn't bolstering some story. He seemed genuinely conflicted, like a man who had been given a map and lost it halfway through. So I did something I hadn't planned. I told him about the bruise. His mouth changed shape, softened, then hardened. How did she explain that? He asked, not accusatory but careful, like someone handling an animal. She said she hit a cabinet at work. He swore under his breath. Emily would cover for things. She'd rather take the blame than make a scene. Did she ever talk about us? I asked again, because I wanted to know what narrative he'd been part of. He looked at me like I'd turned into a stranger. Only that you were a good husband. That you loved her. She was grateful. It was a small mercy. In this man, I could see fragments of the Emily I had known. Loyal, protective, a woman who would shoulder pain if it kept her people quiet. But there was another piece I hadn't expected. He looked guilty in a human way, not the predatory guilt I'd pictured. He looked ashamed of how things had happened, ashamed in a way that suggested he had never wanted to be the poison in someone's marriage. That ought to have deflated me. It didn't. If anything, it made the whole betrayal harsher. Not because it was less his fault, but because the universe had layered the betrayal with complexity. If he'd been a villain, maybe my response would have been simpler. Instead, he occupied a moral gray no one wanted to admit existed in stories like mine. And you, did you ever? I started, then stopped. There was a tremor in my hands, the first I'd felt all day. Sleep with her. Mark finished my sentence. He looked me in the eye, honest as a man can be when his record is messy. Yes. He nodded once, like that answered things. Yes. For a while. It wasn't something I planned. It was, we were both lonely, I guess. There's no good explanation. We tried to keep it out of work. I thought it would end. It didn't. You knew she was married, I said. Of course. She said you were separated. He cut himself off, as if repenting for the lie he'd repeated. She told me stuff, about distance, about the house, about how you were both exhausted. I let it happen because it made me feel needed. Needed, I repeated, savoring the word like an iron in my mouth. We sat in the cafe and exchanged confessions like prisoners swapping contraband. Mark's remorse sounded like the kind that keeps you awake, not the loud, performative sort. You could have stopped, I said finally. My voice didn't rise. It hardened. I know, he said. I know. I stopped when I realized she wanted more than a thing on the side. She started asking if we could be more. She made plans. He broke off. She made plans. The image of Emily whispering I miss you to a man who wasn't me looped in my mind like a scratched record. A vision of her whole life spilling into someone else's lap. You told her you loved her, I said. No, Mark's jaw worked. She said it to me. She said she felt alive. I didn't say it back. I thought if she wanted that, it was because you weren't giving it to her. There it was, the stinging, humiliating truth I'd been trying to avoid. The idea that my absence, my failures, were a kind of wound opening the door to this other life. It didn't matter to me if Mark was a cad. What mattered was that Emily had found someone who could pick her when I had been too distracted to hold on. My hands shook so hard I spilled my coffee. Mark reached for napkins, awkward, apologetic. For a second we were merely two men rendered small by a woman's choices. I have recordings, I said, and for the first time my voice cracked. I heard them. I know. Mark looked down, suddenly very small in a world that had not expected him to be held accountable by the man he'd betrayed. I'm sorry, he said like a prayer. I didn't move. I felt my mouth form the sentence I had rehearsed in a dozen variations in my head. You're going to stay away from her, I said. Not a question. He looked up, startled. I already have, he said. We hadn't seen each other in 2 weeks. Then why tonight? I asked. Why risk it? He hesitated. She called. She said she needed to talk. She sounded desperate. Desperation. The word tasted like rust. I left the cafe with a handful of napkins and a head full of schemes. The first piece of the plan, observe, gather, confront, was done. I had Mark's confession, shaky and guilt-laced. I had the recording. I had the bruise explained away as something else in his account, but oddly, with an admission of how guilty they both felt, which softened some of my black and white rage and replaced it with a colder calculus. Back home, the house was the same. The faint lemon scent lingered in the living room, a perfume of shared domesticity. I turned on the television to create noise, something familiar, and scrolled through the recording, careful to save copies in 3 places, to upload encrypted files to cloud backups I'd set up under another name. I wanted redundancy. Data didn't forget the way people did. I told myself the revenge would be surgical. No violence. No melodrama. A dismantling of the illusions she'd built. An exposure so thorough that she couldn't rebuild the walls with the same mortar. Then, like a slow leak, a different feeling bled through the edges of my plan. Pity. Not the soft pity you give a child, but a sharp, disgusted pity at the raw human cost of all our compromises. I thought of the night she'd come home and said I'm fine. Of the way she'd flinched when I touched her collarbone. I thought of the nights I'd tried to be close and felt the distance like a physical thing between us. If my revenge was a fire, it would not be to watch her burn. It would be to set a furnace powerful enough to melt the careful lies, to see what remained when the facade ran like wax. I spent the rest of the day in a strange, buzzing silence, arranging details like a private architect of ruin. I sketched emails I would never send, imagined the texts I would forward anonymously, rehearsed conversations in which I would be calm and precise and devastatingly fair. In the evening, Emily arrived home. She wore a coat that smelled faintly of the man I'd just interrogated, and sighed when she walked in like she'd carried the weight of the world. Her smile when she saw me was automatic, one I recognized and had loved. It was also a performance. She dropped her bag with a softness that hid something urgent. Long day, she said. I answered. I had put the recorder in my pocket earlier and kept my face neutral, like a man testing the temperature of a room before he lights a match. She moved around the kitchen with habitual gestures, making tea the way she did when she wanted to steady herself. I watched the bruise on her collarbone when she bent to tie her shoe. There it was, half hidden beneath a sweater. A crescent moon of color that seemed to glow in the lamplight. Are you okay? I asked. She froze for a second. I told you, Alex. I'm fine. The tea kettle hissed. I could feel the whole house holding its breath with me. You left your phone in the car, she said, a lie dangling like a thread. I could hear the one she wanted to pull free, the one that would unravel everything and perhaps mend the torn fabric of our lives by sheer truth. I didn't reach for the thread. I set my face into something sharper, something colder. Mark called me today, I said. She looked, finally, off balance. For a heartbeat, honesty flickered in her eyes, then she plastered on composure. Why would he call you? He owns a coffee shop nearby. We talked. I watched my words land on her like I was testing how far she'd gone without me. She laughed, a brittle sound. That's funny. Her laugh was a deflection. I had become an archaeologist of our marriage, and the dust we sifted through tonight would decide whether we dug down to bones. Was it good? I asked quietly. She met my gaze and I saw the woman I'd loved, the tired version of her, the one who still craved gentleness. He's a decent man. He's kind. Is he the reason you've been distant? I asked. It wasn't a confession. It was a scalpel. For the first time since the bruise, she looked at me without armor. The room filled with small noises, the kettle's song, the refrigerator's hum, the city far off beyond our windows, and in that noise she made a choice. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. Her voice was thin. I felt lost, Alex. I know that's not an excuse. I felt the strangest thing then, not triumph, but a raw, primitive grief. The man I'd once been, protective, generous, perhaps naive, wanted to collapse into supplication, to plead, to be forgiven. But the plan I'd stitched in the quiet of the afternoon was stronger than my impulse to beg. I recorded tonight, I told her. I could see the color drain from her face like paint being washed away. She sagged, a small, animal motion. Why? She whispered. Because you've been erasing me, I said. Because you let someone else live the parts of you I thought were mine. Her eyes filled. For the first time she looked like she might break. And that, her genuine, unvarnished fear, was the exact raw material I needed. I had the recordings. I had Mark's confession. I had a bruise and an explanation that would never be believed without corroboration. The pieces were assembled. Now came the crueler part, choosing the moment to strike. I could feel my hands shaking again, but this was not the tremor of a man about to erupt. It was the shake of someone balancing a loaded scale. She reached for me with a trembling hand as if to steady herself. Alex. But I had already stepped back into the role I'd rehearsed all day. The judge, not the supplicant. Don't, I said. It was the final syllable of the afternoon, a punctuation that made no promise of mercy. She crumpled to the kitchen chair like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Outside, the city blurred into night, indifferent, as if the world could continue without acknowledging the slow, private catastrophe unfurling in our kitchen. I looked at her, at the woman who had been my home and my estrangement, and felt the hard, cold birth of what I had decided to become. I would take everything she had used to rewrite our life and turn it into a mirror she couldn't ignore. I would not simply break her. I would make sure no one could pretend she had not broken us first. And then, because the plan requires action, I called Mark and told him, quietly, that we needed to meet the next morning. He agreed. When the call ended, I sat in the dim kitchen with 2 cups of cooling tea and a recording that hummed with betrayal. The house felt suddenly too big, too quiet, filled with the sounds of things we had never said. There is an art to revenge, I thought, a terrible craft that required patience and a steady hand. I had faith in my hands. But as I sat there mapping the next steps, a small, terrifying part of me wondered whether the act of tearing everything down would leave me standing in the rubble with nothing left to love. The thought made me dizzy. I turned the phone over in my palm and pressed record again, this time, my fingers steady, my voice soft, documenting everything I intended to do. If I must become the architect of ruin, I wanted at least one honest record of why. The next morning, the sky looked washed out, gray, streaked with soft gold, the kind of light that hinted at something cleansing. Or catastrophic. I sat in my car outside the same cafe where I'd met Mark the day before, listening to the engine idle, listening to my own pulse throb at my temples. Emily had slept in the guest room. Or pretended to. I didn't check. Neither of us spoke when morning crept in through the blinds. Her silence wasn't defensive anymore. It was the hollow kind, as though she'd been scraped out from the inside. I had wanted her to feel that, wanted her to taste even a portion of the ache she'd buried me under. But seeing her shell-shocked, terrified, small, it dug at something I thought had died. A part of me that still remembered her falling asleep on my chest the night we lost the baby. The way she cried into my shirt because she thought she had failed me, and I held her for hours whispering that none of this was her fault. That version of her felt like a dream now. Or worse, a lie I had loved too deeply. But revenge has no room for nostalgia. Not the kind I had planned. When I stepped inside the cafe, Mark was already there. Same table. Same 2 coffees waiting. Black for him, sweetened for me. He stood when I approached, hesitant, as though unsure whether I'd hit him or sit down. I sat down. He lowered himself back into his seat slowly. You said it was urgent, he murmured. It is, I said. He looked awful. Dark circles under his eyes, hair unkempt, hands trembling just a bit. Guilt had aged him overnight. Emily knows I know, I said. The color drained from his face. What did she say? That she didn't want to hurt me, I said flatly. That she felt lost. That it wasn't an excuse. And she's right. He looked down into his coffee like the truth was floating somewhere in the steam. I ended things, he said quietly. Weeks ago. So you said, I replied. But last night proves unfinished business. He winced. That wasn't supposed to happen. I swear, Alex. I didn't mean for any of this. I never meant to steal someone's marriage. I leaned back, studying him. He wasn't lying. Not the way people lie when they're protecting themselves. His shame was too raw. And that, ironically, made what came next easier. I'm not here to fight you, I said. He blinked, startled. You're not. No. I'm here because you and I are the only two people who know the full truth. And what happens next needs both of us. He swallowed. What happens next? I'm going to expose her. His breath hitched. His fingers tightened around his cup. Alex, don't. I lifted an eyebrow. Don't. His voice broke a little. She's not a bad person. She made a terrible mistake. Several. But destroying her, that won't fix anything. Anger flickered in me. Sharp, instinctive. You slept with her. I know, he whispered. And I regret it. Every day. But you don't know what she's been carrying. Do you? I shot back. He shut his eyes. She told me things. About the miscarriage. About how she felt like her body betrayed both of you. How she felt like she owed you a version of herself she couldn't be anymore. It was like being punched in the sternum. I stared at him. Not because I doubted the truth. But because it was a truth Emily had never given me. Guilt washed over me, hot and bitter. Not guilt for my revenge. But guilt for not seeing her grief when I was drowning in mine. Mark looked at me. Remorse draped across his features like a bruise. She wasn't replacing you, he said. She was trying to feel anything. I know that doesn't justify it. But you deserve the whole picture. I sat there, numb. For months I had crafted a narrative in which Emily was cold, distant, selfish. While I was the wounded, steady husband she discarded. But pain distorts memory. Turns people into villains to justify our own heartbreak. I didn't forgive her. Not even close. But for the first time, I saw the shape of the wound beneath her betrayal. And it wasn't clean. Or easy. Or simple. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Because you're about to do something you can't undo, he said quietly. And I don't want to be the reason two people lose everything. It's too late, I murmured. Is it? He asked gently. His question hung in the air like smoke. The breaking point. I left the cafe without answering him. Every step back to the car felt heavier. Every breath sharper. My revenge plan, tidy, cold, efficient, began to waver. Not because she didn't deserve consequences, but because something in me changed when I learned the part of her story she'd hidden. Grief that festers becomes something wild. Something that reaches for the nearest warmth, even if that warmth is wrong. I didn't go home right away. I drove. Aimlessly at first. City blocks blurred into each other. Lights smeared across the windshield like streaks of emotion I couldn't name. Finally, I stopped at the lake where Emily and I used to walk on Sunday mornings, before everything collapsed. Before the miscarriage. Before her late nights. Before my silence became a wall between us. I sat there, staring at the water. The surface was thin, rippling with wind, fragile, but reflective. A mirror. A warning. What would exposing her accomplish? Justice? Vengeance? Vindication? Maybe. But also destruction. Not just of her, but of myself. Because the kind of man who obliterates someone he once loved does not walk away unscarred. The wind shifted. The water churned. And something inside me cracked. Not the rage, not the humiliation, but the certainty. Maybe revenge wasn't the answer. Maybe it was the last language of a man who didn't know how to grieve properly. I sat with that thought until the sun dipped low and the water darkened. Then I drove home. The reckoning. Emily sat at the kitchen table when I walked in. Hands folded. Eyes swollen. Barely breathing. Where were you? She whispered. Thinking. She nodded like she'd been expecting that answer. Like she'd been preparing for a verdict. Alex, her voice trembled. I'm so sorry. I don't. There are no excuses, I know that. I was hurting. And I handled it in the worst possible way. She swallowed hard. You didn't deserve what I did. You loved me through everything. And I. Her voice broke. I stood there, looking at the woman I'd once promised everything to. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. Not because she'd been caught, but because she had finally stopped performing. I set my phone on the table. Face up. Unlocked. The recording app still open. Her breath hitched. Are you going to send it to people? She whispered. I considered it. She shut her eyes, and one tear slipped down her cheek. And something in me, something bruised, raw, human, softened. Emily, I said, sitting across from her. I'm not going to destroy your life. She sagged in relief so intense it looked painful. But, I continued, we're not staying together. Her eyes snapped open. Wide, injured. Alex, please. We can fix this. We can go to therapy. I'll quit my job. No, I said gently. You broke something that can't be repaired. Not because you cheated, but because you didn't trust me with your pain. Her breath shuddered. I was scared. So was I whispered. Silence stretched between us like a bridge newly burned. I'm filing for separation, I said quietly. We'll divide everything fairly. I'm not going to humiliate you. I'm not going to use the recordings. Why? Her voice cracked. Why not? Because revenge wasn't justice. It was grief with sharp edges. And I didn't want to bleed anymore. Because I loved you, I said. And I don't want the last thing I ever do for you to be cruelty. She stared at me, devastated. And for the first time since the night I heard her whispering another man's name, I felt free. Not happy, not healed, but freed from the choking weight of betrayal. She stood slowly, walked toward me, and reached out. Not to touch, but to surrender. I'm sorry, she whispered again. I know, I said. And that was the end. 1 month later. The apartment I moved into was small, quiet, beautifully dull. My clothes fit easily in the single-bedroom closet. My coffee mug had its own place on the counter. Silence no longer terrified me. The separation papers were signed. Emily moved out of our house. Mark transferred to another department. Life resumed, in its ironic, indifferent way. One night, as I sat by the window watching the city lights pulse like distant stars, a notification appeared on my phone. A voice memo, from myself, recorded the night I vowed revenge. I hesitated, then pressed play. My voice, cold and tight with pain, spilled through the tiny speaker. Tonight, everything changes. I will break her the way she broke me. I listened to the whole thing, every vengeful syllable, every furious promise. And when it ended, I deleted it, because the only thing more shocking than the betrayal was realizing that revenge would have turned me into someone I would never forgive. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and let the quiet settle. Not peace, not closure, but something gentler. A beginning.